Hi, everybody. Grab a Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 2. When I was a kid, I went through a phase for a number of years where, in my free time, I did jigsaw puzzles. And I would sit at the dining room table at our house. It was glass, because that was cool in the early 90s. And it was frosted and clouded. I still remember that. And would lay it all out, and sometimes would take days, even weeks, depending on how much time I had to assemble that. And then came the always difficult process of turning it over without it crumbling into 1,000 pieces, literally 1,000 pieces, so that you could duct tape the back of it so that it would then be together and you could frame it or do whatever. They never got framed. Lord knows where they're at now. But if you've ever put together a jigsaw puzzle, you'll know that there's a strategy to it. When you dump out all the pieces from the box, what's the first thing you find? The four corners. From there you go to the edges, and you assemble the edges. So at that point you begin to pile based on similar color. I think that might go in the same area. But what we can't do is neglect the most important piece of the entire puzzle. The box. If you don't have the picture on the cover of the box, you have no idea what you're about to assemble. So you have to keep that. You set it up so you can look at what's coming, and that's how you can begin to put it all together. You know what it's supposed to look like. Therefore, you can now assemble all the pieces. When it comes to the topic of marriage, what we cannot do is look at the world around us and say, that's how we should do it. Because our world has no idea how to do it. There is an ongoing debate about marriage. Over the last number of years, for the first time in the history of the world, there is now a majority of people in our culture who favor alternative options to marriage. There's an ongoing cynicism about marriage. There's this growing discontent and dissatisfaction with the institution of marriage. People are waiting longer than ever before they get married so they can have a quote-unquote life before they get married. Because apparently, once you get married, you might as well go to the grave. And there is certainly an abandonment of marriage. Divorce rates are higher than ever. New marriage rates are dramatically down, so there are more marriages ending and fewer marriages beginning than ever before. With that has come a dramatic increase in cohabitation of men and women living together, not married, but in a marriage-type relationship without actual marriage before and if maybe marriage may ever come. Our culture is thoroughly confused and has no idea which way is up when it comes to marriage. Genesis 2 functions for us as the cover on the puzzle box. It shows to us what it's supposed to look like. This is marriage. This is its glorious picture. The next chapter, it's going to get blown up. But for right here, it looks really good. And there is this crystal clarity of the design from God of marriage. Listen to this quote by Victor Hamilton. He writes, "Everything thus far in Genesis that's been scrutinized by God has been given a positive assessment. Every situation has come through as either good or very good. For the first time, we encounter something that is not good: man's lack of a corresponding companion. The skies without the luminaries and birds are incomplete. The seas without the fish are incomplete. Without mankind and land animals, the earth is incomplete. As a matter of fact, every phenomenon in Genesis 1 and 2, God accepted, is in need of something else to complete it and to enable it to function." When we get to Genesis 2, Adam is incomplete. He is not incomplete because he is single. So don't hear me say, if you are not married, you are incomplete and your life is worthless. Nobody is saying that. He has no counterpart. He is alone. He's incomplete. And God is going to now address that. Genesis chapter 2, let's start in verse 18. Then Yahweh God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." And out of the ground Yahweh God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought each to the man to see what he would call it. Whatever the man called the living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him. So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib which he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This one finally is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." So let's walk through the text. There's a few movements in the passage as it moves from one scene to another. Here's the first scene, solitude. It begins with solitude. God has gotten to this point of creation. Chapter 1 is this cosmic, wide-angled lens, this view of creation from a big picture. Chapter 2 zooms in on day 6, the creation of mankind. And we've gotten so far through Adam, the man who has been created, and so far everything's been good. 7 times God has repeated, it's good. And at the end of his creation, the end of chapter 1, he looks at all of it and says, "Behold, it is very good." It's good. It's as good as it could be. And we talked about this before. Good is not a moral good, it's a functional good. When God says it's good, that means it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's functioning according to its design. So the planets are good because they're doing what they're supposed to do as planets. The weather systems are good because they're doing what they're supposed to do. The animals are good. They're doing what they're supposed to do. And God looks at his perfect, very good creation, looks at his perfect, very good man, and says, that's not good. It's not because there's an inherent flaw in Adam. It's because he's alone. That is not his design. That's not how God created him to live. Derek Kidner wrote, "Man will not live until he loves, giving himself away to another on his own level." So there's no record of Adam complaining. There's no record that Adam goes to God and says to him, "I think you missed a piece. Look at your creation. Do you notice something that's missing?" I do. He doesn't do that at all. He has no idea what he's missing. She literally doesn't exist. So he hasn't brought this issue to God's attention to fix, but God, as the designer, sees the issue, knows the issue, and addresses it. People have talked over the years about how humanity has this habit of consuming, that we have this hole in our soul that we simply cannot fill. So we try to fill it with relationships, we try to fill it with food, we try to fill it with money, we try to fill it with pleasure, whatever it might be, we just try to fill it, but it's never ending. And philosopher after philosopher and theologian, they've come to this conclusion where they say something like, you have a God-shaped hole in your soul. And the only thing that can fill that is God. And that's true. You're going to be lacking in your soul at the soul level without God. You're going to constantly be looking to creation, to relationships, to whatever it might be, to fill something in you that only God himself can fill. All that's very true. But when God looks at Adam and says, this is not good, he's acknowledging that in Adam's soul is not only a God-shaped hole, but a person-shaped hole. Because while Adam has unlimited access to God, it's not good that he is alone. There's more to be had in terms of relationship that God does not meet. Only another human being can meet. It's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Let's talk about this word helper, because there are times ladies get all bent out of shape about that word. Because it sounds subservient. It sounds like I just work for him. I'm just his helper. He's the boss and I'm just the janitor or whatever it might be. That's not what this means. So let that go. Cool your feminism jets just a little bit. This isn't a bad word at all. It's the Hebrew word ezer. It's used 19 times in the Old Testament. 16 of those is in reference to God himself. God is the helper. So, ladies, you're not being demeaned by being titled helper. You're being elevated. Man is being demeaned because we need the help. Yes and amen. And you are designed by God to be the helper. The words used in Psalm 121, the first couple of verses, I look to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. Same word. This is the powerful one who can come to do something that I cannot do. So there's a helper that needs to be made that can do what Adam cannot do. A helper that is suitable for him. Suitable is a fun word. It literally translates as like opposite. Like opposite. So this helper is to be like him in the fact that she's human, because there aren't any other humans, but she is to be opposite him, not the same. Different. In case you haven't realized it, men and women are mildly different. Personalities are different. Giftings are different. Wiring's different. Bodies are different. That's a good thing. That's to be celebrated, not minimized. God has wired it to be that way. It could be translated as in front of. So think like a mirror. A helper who is suitable for him. It's like looking in a mirror. It's used in Daniel chapter 8 when Daniel's standing by the banks of the river and the angel of the Lord is standing in front of him. It's the same phrase, in front of. Right there. It's like there's a man in front of me. So when he's to look at this helper that God is about to make, she's going to look like him. She's going to be like him, but she's going to be profoundly different than him. And then you've got this declaration in verse 18. The order of the text seems to be very, very weird. It's not good that man's alone. I'll make a helper suitable. And then verses 19 and 20 insert this little narrative about Adam naming all the animals. So God says, I'm going to make him a helper suitable. And then there's this parade of animals in front of Adam as he sits there, and whatever Adam calls that animal, that's its name. We don't know how long this took. And one animal comes, Adam goes, horse. Sus is actually what he was said. That's the Hebrew word for horse. He wouldn't have said horse. He didn't know English. Another one, cow, or whatever it is. I don't know that one off the top of my head. And on it goes. He's naming the animals. Naming equals a bit of authority. We already talked about that. God names it day and night. God has that authority. There's some authority here, because remember, we've already talked about humanity is to have dominion over creation. So Adam is expressing authority over even the animal world. And then after naming all of the animals, however long that took, and I imagine it was frustrating. Maybe at the beginning he's creative with platypus, rhinoceros. At the end he's like, bat, dog. And at the end of it, for Adam, there was not found a helper suitable for him. Doesn't that strike you as weird? I'm going to make a helper suitable for him. So here's all the animals. And oh man, that helper is not among them. I was really hoping the dog would be man's best friend, but it didn't work out like that. I was hoping maybe the orangutan would do it, but that's not it. Couldn't God have just created Eve and said, here you go? Yes. Was God trying to figure out this helper by trial and error? No. This process of the animals parading in front of him and him looking at them and naming them, this is not for God to try to figure out which one fits the best. This process is for Adam, because Adam has no idea what he's missing out on. He does not conceive of a female human being because none exist. He knows the animals. He knows God. That's all he knows. So what we do know is the effect this would have had on Adam as the animals are parading in front of him, as he goes, oh, that's a boy horse, and that one's a girl horse. That one's a boy duck, that one's a girl duck. I don't know if the animals have special names for boys or girls, but you get what I'm saying. That one's a boy gorilla, that one's a girl gorilla. So that over time, the light bulb goes on for Adam to realize, I get it. There's no girl version of me. I am alone. God knows he is alone. Adam does not know that he is alone. He needs help to know that he's alone. And this creates in Adam a desire for something that he never knew he needed. And how kind God is to create in him that desire so that when he provides it for him, he is joy-filled. You know, there's this trend among younger Christians who are single and newly married who, for whatever reason, decide that if you really, really, really want to get married, you shouldn't want to get married because Jesus should be enough for you. And it sounds super spiritual. It's not. It's very unbiblical. Listen, God might call you to be single. The Apostle Paul is very clear about that. 1 Corinthians 7, Jesus talks about that. There are those who are literally gifted with singleness to devote all their time and attention to the Lord and to his kingdom. That's not for most people. The vast majority of people will be called by God to get married. Don't ever feel guilty for wanting to be married. Don't ever feel guilty for desiring a godly spouse. Don't ever feel guilty for wanting a godly, God-honoring marriage, ever. God himself creates that desire because without it, we are in solitude. Number 2, here's the solution. So God causes him to go to sleep, verse 21, and takes out one of his ribs. The scholars are fun when you start talking about what that means. Why a rib? Well, there are some scholars who say what God did was quite literally open up and take out a rib, just cracked it off and used that rib and whoop, fashioned Eve. There are others who say it was a handful. God reaches in, just takes it all, takes bone, muscle, flesh, tendons, capillaries, takes all of that and uses all of those raw parts to create Eve. The most fanciful of the views is God cut him in half and took half, and with that half made Eve and recreated the other half of Adam, which is why later he will say they become one flesh, because they originally were one flesh. Again, there's no biblical basis for it, but it sure is fun to think about, isn't it? Takes the rib and fashions her, literally builds her. The words used in Genesis 11:4 at Babel, let us build a tower to the heavens. So he builds her, he fashions her. He makes man out of dirt And when you hang out with a bunch of men, you go, yeah, that fits. But there's a finesse to women that men don't have, because God fashions her. There's more attention given to her than any other part of the creation. Intimately, deeply, personally involved. Again, comes out of the side of Adam. And again, scholars are fun with this. Is there metaphorical imagery? Is that the point of God taking a rib, that she comes out of the side of him? Listen to what Matthew Henry said about that. He said, the woman, quote, is not made out of his head to top him, not out of his feet to be trampled upon by him, but out of his side to be equal with him, under his arm to be protected, and near his heart to be beloved. I don't know if that imagery is true, but it sounds really good. You could use that on Valentine's Day. So God now fashions her, closes up the place, and brought her, the end of verse 22, brought her to the man. It's the same language as bringing the animals to Adam. He now brings her to Adam, showing she is not in the order of the animals. She is different. She is not part of the animal kingdom that he's going to subdue and have dominion over. She is like him, and together they will subdue and have dominion over creation. She's unique from the other aspects of creation. He brings her to the man like a father walking the bride down the aisle to give her to her husband. God escorts her to Adam. It's a beautiful image of what's happening here in the garden. Verse 23 carries his response. It's Hebrew poetry. He quite literally busts into song when he sees her. This one, finally, is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one, as opposed to all the animals who already paraded in front of me that weren't like me. This one is like me. This one finally literally translates as this time. This one, this time is mine. She's bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She's like me. Bone typically represents strength. Flesh typically represents weakness. She's like me. We have similar strengths. We have similar weaknesses. She's mine. This one, the end of 23, shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. Every week so far, you've been lucky enough to have fun Hebrew phrases that just tickle your tongue and are a joy to say, tohu wabohu, all that good stuff. This is another one. She shall be called woman, Isha, because she was taken out of man, Ish. Ish and Isha. This is the first usage of the Hebrew word Ish for man. Every time up to this point, the word for man is Adam. From Adamah, ground. So Moses, as the author, as the narrator of what's happening in Genesis here, every time he's talked about Adam, every time he's talked about man, he's defined Adam by his relationship to the ground. Adamah, you are Adam. But when Adam sees her and speaks, this is the first human speech in history, are these words in verse 23. He invents a new word, Ish, for himself, man, and she will be Isha. So while the narrator defines Adam by his relationship to the ground, when he sees Eve, Adam defines himself in relation to her. I am now connected to her in a way that I'm not even connected to the earth. This relationship is above and beyond every other relationship in all of creation. Number 3, solidarity. And look at 24. Therefore, so here's the conclusion. Because God has done this first wedding, God is presenting. He's walked her down the aisle. He's presiding over everything, and now they are together. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Because God has done this is now the definition of marriage itself. Genesis 2:24 is the definition of marriage. It's affirmed by Jesus in Matthew 19 and Mark chapter 10. It's affirmed by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 6 and Ephesians chapter 5. So this is not an antiquated, Old Testament, outdated definition of marriage. It is brought into the New Testament by Jesus and the Apostle Paul. It is the biblical view of marriage. Because God has done this is what will happen. A man will leave his father and his mother, which is very odd to say that, because they live in a patriarchal culture that's getting ready to be formed after this. And the husband did not leave his family. The wife leaves her family. So in ancient cultures, when a marriage would happen, it would be arranged, and the wife, at whatever point it comes to the wedding, he's going to come and get her. She moves, she leaves her family to go live with her husband. That's part of the compound of her husband's family. Wouldn't that be fun? And it's so centered around the husband's family that even if her husband dies, she is still under the authority of his family. She doesn't go back home because her husband's family has become her family. So leaving your parents to get married is quite literal for the wife in their culture. It's metaphorical for the husband. Leave your mother and your father. Sever the relationship that exists, the dominant relationship of your life between you and your parents. That is to be done in the sense of what it's been like up to this point, because your loyalties are not to your parents anymore, they're to your spouse. Your spouse wins over your parents. Let he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Your parents don't get to win over your spouse. Your spouse gets to win over your parents. You get to win over your spouse's parents. That's how it's supposed to go. It's biblical. Just quote Genesis 2:24 to them. So you are to sever, not ending the relationship, but it's to forever change. Your relationship with your parents is now different, and it's now to loyalty to your spouse. You are to leave your parents and cleave to his wife. A man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife. Cleaves is a fun word. Let me read a passage for you out of Ruth chapter 1. That word is used 4 times in Ruth chapter 1 and chapter 2. So let me remind you of the context of the book of Ruth. Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons, they have to leave. There's a famine in Bethlehem, and they have to leave. They go down to Moab. The 2 sons marry Moabite women, and while they're there, her husband dies, and then both of her sons die. And she's now left with, here's a widow with 2 daughters-in-law. And she says to them, you need to go home. Go back to your father's home. God has done whatever he's done. I'm leaving. And Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah, the one, does that. Kisses her bye and goes home. Ruth chapter 1, verse 14, they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. That's cleave from Genesis 2. But Ruth said, or then she said, verse 15, behold, your sister-in-law has returned to her people, and her gods return after your sister-in-law. Verse 16, but Ruth said, do not press me to forsake you in turning back from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may Yahweh do to me and more, if anything but death separates you and me. That's the relational picture of cleaving of a husband to a wife. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. We don't separate until death, which is why we say it in weddings, until death do we part. Because it's supposed to last a lifetime. You are to cling to, cleave to this person. It's used twice in chapter 4 when Boaz will say to Ruth, you need to stay close to my servants in the field so you don't get hurt. Cling to them. Stay with them. It's used also, 2 Kings chapter 5. There's a military commander named Naaman who goes to Elisha the prophet. He has leprosy, and he asks for healing from Elisha, and Elisha says, go dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times, you'll be fine. And Naaman's grievously offended. He's like, oh, the rivers in my home country are way better than that. They're way cleaner than that. I'm not going to go get in a dirty river. That's not going to clean me at all. But he does it, and he gets out the last time, and he's perfectly healed, and he goes back to say thank you, offers gifts. Elisha refuses, and he goes on his way. Well, Elisha has a servant named Gehazi, and Gehazi gets greedy and decides, I'm going to pursue Naaman without Elisha knowing, and I'm going to take the gifts, and I'm going to keep them for myself. So he chases Naaman and his party down, and Naaman greets him. He goes, hey, Elisha changed his mind. He wants all the stuff. Go ahead and give it to me. I'll take it to him. Takes all the stuff, hides it, and goes in to see Elisha. And Elisha says, where you been? He said, oh, nowhere. I was just hanging out. It's on YouTube earlier. It's all playing Angry Birds. And Elisha says, did you not know that I went with you? My heart went with you when you went to Naaman. May his leprosy cling to you the rest of your life. It's the same word in Genesis 2 for cleave. So it's a gross negative picture of the closeness that's to exist between husband and wife. Ruth clings to her. You can't separate us. Leprosy clings to his skin. You can't separate it. That's what husbands and wives are supposed to be. To the point where he says at the end of 24, they shall become one flesh. The one flesh union between a husband and wife. They become as if they're one person in the eyes of God. God doesn't see them as separate, but together as one. They're in total unity. They're in solidarity with one another. And notice the pattern of Genesis 2:24. Leave his father and his mother. It means you grow up. It means you mature. Marriage is not for the immature. Marriage is not for kids or people who act like kids. There's supposed to be maturity. Then you cleave, marriage, come together, and then there is the one flesh union. That phrase, one flesh union, is used by Paul in 1 Corinthians 6 in a sexual connotation. So there's more to a one flesh union than sex, but it's not less than that. Which means this: sex is designed for one place only, and that's in marriage. For mature people who commit to one another in marriage, those people are the ones who are to have a sexual relationship. And if you're not mature in that marriage relationship, you ought not have a sexual relationship with anyone. You are not ready for it. God has said so in Genesis chapter 2. So he lays out for us with explicit clarity the definition of marriage. It is one man married to one woman in one marriage for one lifetime. That's marriage. Now, again, in chapter 3, it's getting ready to get blown up. And some of you right now live in the reality of that blow up. You can look at 2:24 and go, yeah, that sounds great. That's not my reality. That was the hope. That was the intention. But that's not what actually went down because of your sin, their sin, both sin, whatever it might be. Sometimes our sinful nature doesn't allow marriage to work in this way, and it gets broken, it gets blown up. So what do? We confess to the Lord any sin. We trust that he's going to use this for whatever he's going to use it for, and we move forward. That's what we do. But notice verse 25. The man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. In the Bible, nakedness is typically associated with guilt. It's typically associated with shame. But they're naked and there's no shame. They're naked, but they're not guilty of anything. They're perfect. They haven't sinned. This is pre-fall. We're going to look at the fall next Wednesday. This is before that event. This is perfection. This is paradise. This is pure innocence that exists between Adam and Eve. There is nothing that mars their relationship. There's nothing that harms their relationship. None of us have ever known that. Ever. A single day in your life. A single day of your marriage. You've never known what it's like to not have your sin or their sin hurt the marriage. They experienced that until chapter 3. And then never again. But don't miss the point. Not good that he's alone. So here's what I've done. This is the solution. I've brought them together in marriage, and now they are to function as one. K.A. Matthews wrote this. He said, isolation is not the divine norm for human beings. Community is the creation of God. He did this. He designed this. So go back to the imagery of the puzzle box. You have to have the picture on the cover. You have no idea what it is you're supposed to build. And if you happen to put some right pieces together, it'd be an accident, not done on purpose by design. And in Genesis 1 and 2, all the pieces have been put together. We know what it's supposed to look like. This is perfect creation. This is paradise. It's very good, God says. Eve is the last piece of the puzzle. The one hole that's left in all of creation. Here at the end of Genesis 2, God clicks that piece into place. And now, even though Adam has had God, that's not his design. He is now fully complete. The picture is complete and it is good. Because in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and verse 28, humanity received the divine commission to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over creation. Adam can't do that alone. But now together, they can fulfill God's design for them. And his design is very good. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the gift of marriage. Thank you for creating community. You've designed us for a relationship. We're not meant to be alone, in isolation, away from others. We have a hole in our soul that only you can fill. But there's also a hole in our soul that you have designed for another human to fill. For the person that you've set up for us to marry. We know there are those that you call to singleness as a tremendous gift to your kingdom. And that's great. We bless them and pray for them and commission them and wish them the best. But for the vast majority, marriage is your design. To come together as husband and wife, as the backbone of society, of the family, to be fruitful and multiply, to spread and have dominion over all of creation, and to take the faith that you have passed on to us and to pass it on to them so that the honor of you goes to another generation. What a glorious gift. And it's the most challenging thing in all the world, so give us the strength to get it right. Give us the strength to see the right design and to live in its pattern. And many in this room have pain associated with marriage, whether from divorce or abandonment, adultery, death, there's pain, but you heal, and you restore, and you forgive, and you move us forward with you under your blessing. So be the healer. Be the one who comes alongside to ease pain, to restore things that have been hurt and lost, to forgive. But ultimately, thank you for what the New Testament does as it looks back on Genesis 2 and says that this is just a picture of the relationship between Jesus and his people. That's why you've set up marriage to begin with, so that it would be a reflection, so that it would be a sign that points to you and the gospel of Jesus, of a Savior who loves and sacrificially offers himself for the benefit of the one that he loves. We're the glad recipients of your love for us. As we do every time we gather, we take a piece of bread and a cup of juice, and we remember the loving sacrifice of Jesus for the sake of his bride, your people in this place. Thank you for Jesus. We remember him now. In his name we pray. Amen.